Andrew Pappas is the co-founder of Rengen Marketing, an indie dev marketing company which provides consulting and managed marketing services. He's also the host of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games, interviewing established developers, marketeers, and other industry veterans. Through these efforts, his mission is to empower and educate indie devs in building a strong and sustainable indie games community. And I'm delighted to be here with Andrew today. He's a marketing expert with heaps of experience in indie game marketing and who also specializes in paid advertising. We're here to debunk some of the myths about paid advertising today. And I'm so glad to have you with us today, Andrew.
Yeah, same here, and really appreciate you guys having me be a part of this. It's great to help out the community.
Fantastic, lovely. So let's dive straight in.
Sure.
Please tell us a little bit about how you got into games and what brought you to start Rengen.
Yeah, so growing up as a kid in the early 80s, I forgot exactly what system, but I got an Atari and then slowly got other consoles, a lot, but Nintendo, PlayStation specifically. And just growing up as a kid, it was just a very, awesome experience for me. Just loved playing games. I mean, that's kind of like everybody's story, right? But then as I got older, I realized that, you have less time for things, and gaming was one of them, unfortunately. And as I, through this, I also started a career through marketing and really started focusing on that more. But then as I was developing my career further, I still always had a passion for games and playing different game types. And honestly, I wanted to do more with the community than just be a player. And then I suddenly one day realized that, hey, I could do marketing and still help out games, and particularly indie devs and indie games as a whole, because I think they are very underrepresented in a lot of ways. I mean, they've come a long way since, our more traditional AAA titles from back in the day. But I realized that those things came together. They went together very well. And ever since then, that's pretty much how Rengen was born, out of just sheer passion in terms of playing games, but wanting to be more with the community and helping out with the community.
Yeah, thank you. And so what is it you're actually doing for devs now? Cover the whole range of marketing?
Yeah, there's a whole range of different things. In particular, to sum it up, it's consulting and some managed services. So consulting is a big part of it, but also more specifically managed services. So that's everything from organic efforts and paid advertising and other things that kind of fall under those two buckets.
And do you get involved in the PR side of things?
To some extent, that's not necessarily an area that I really focus on or specialize in, though I do understand that it's important, and I do know of, what strategies can be implemented and everything. But right now, that's not a main focus for me.
And would you say that you focused more on the organic strategy of marketing or on the paid advertising stuff? Your particular expertise is for the paid stuff, right?
Correct. Yep. I would say from a managed services standpoint, it would be both of those. But I definitely have a lot of expertise in the paid side of things. I've been doing that for probably about 6-7+ years.
Oh, great. That's awesome. Because, I mean, I've had it myself, and, people say that it doesn't work. And then there's people that rely on it. And then there are other people who say once you set it up and you get a system, you can just crank it up, and
right.
It's like a turnkey. So what are the myths, and what works and what doesn't?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And in terms of myths, or at least people calling out to saying oh, paid advertising doesn't work. I mean, because I've seen it numerous times, or I've heard about it and everything. And honestly, I think it comes down to one main thing, which is, people's expectations. Not only that, but paid advertising platforms as a whole can be pretty cumbersome and require a lot of skill sets and knowledge behind those platforms to use. So at face value, the concept of them is pretty simple. I pay money and I get end result, whether that's a click to my site, downloading my game, signing up for my email list. Pretty straightforward. But what I think a lot of people miss on that, and it's nothing against them, because let's face it, devs are focused on making their game. So they don't necessarily have the mental bandwidth to allocate towards, marketing, especially with paid advertising in those channels. So they go in with this idea that if I pay money, I'll get this end result, but they might not know of what types of levers or triggers to push. They might not know of certain ad types to use. So they're just kind of trying a little bit of everything, without knowing what might be the best direction based off of their desired objectives or goals. And then from those efforts, if they're not necessarily doing it with the right plan or mind, obviously the right intentions, but might not have the right understanding of what to do, then it easily becomes a thing where, or at least an experience where what they ended up getting was not what they expected. Thus, and a lot of times the discussion comes about of paid advertising doesn't work. But in the moments that it does work, as you said, it comes down through a process of gathering data, understanding what that data is, making decisions backed by that information, and then optimizing campaigns further to a point where it becomes essentially scalable, and then kind of like turning up the crank, so to speak, putting more money at it, and then getting that return on investment. But to summarize it, I would say the biggest myth I think out there is to say, or people saying that it doesn't work, where, it definitely can work. And it's just a matter of having that understanding behind it.
I mean, that's great. It's really encouraging, actually, that it can work.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, so if I have a great product, which I think is the first thing that you need,
Definitely.
And I've built up, let's say I've released the prototype and I've released a few trailers on YouTube. I've maybe had some influencer coverage, and I have a Discord group, and I've got a bit of a community,
Okay.
say a couple of thousand folk. What are the successful strategies then? What would I do with that in terms of paid advertising?
Well, there's a few things that you can do. So you're already getting a lot of a different engagement on different levels. So with that in mind, you can let's establish some channels first, and most of these are what I'm talking about after this is pretty common with all these channels. So let's say you have Google, right? And the main ones I would focus on for Google would be Google Display, and part of the display network is YouTube, but we'll just call it YouTube. And then another would be Facebook. So I would have those channels in place. So as you mentioned, you have all these other assets, let's call them, where people are going to your Discord, they're going to your website, they're engaging with your item, with your game on various levels. Well, what you can do, the biggest one I would do, especially if you already have this type of engagement, chances are you're probably getting some good web traffic too. People might be going to specific landing pages if you have a lot of them, or they're just checking out your homepage for updates and things. Well, with paid advertising on all these channels I just mentioned, you can create an audience pool. So what that does is basically people visit your site, and you can say, hey, anybody who visits my site, I want to collect just their basic information. Basically, it just puts a cookie on that user, and then you can use that audience that you just created. It's like a custom audience you created, and then you can re-engage with those individuals. And the reason why that's really important to consider and do, especially if you have an audience like that, is because, let's face it, everybody, whether it's us or players, is busy. And having that audience created is going to allow you to re-engage with them and remind them of your product. And that strategy can be very layered too. It could just be a matter of, hey, this is the game. It's like a little reminder about your game, right? Or let's say you have people in an email list which haven't purchased that game yet. And then you can go ahead and just remind them to purchase the game if you're already released out. Or if you're not, I mean, just basically what that does is the remarketing allows you to set up a funnel to re-engage with people and driving them closer to the main action you want them to take, whether it's signing up for your email list or to, purchase your game. And that's, I would say, when you have an audience like that, one of the main things you'd want to be doing, because there's a good chance that they might not necessarily, follow through. And I think it's one of the best ways you can re-engage with those users, especially for anybody who isn't very active to committing or might have that difficulty remembering your game. Because even if you have all these channels available and people are engaging, it doesn't necessarily mean that every single one of them is highly active on all those channels. So you want to properly make sure that you have another way to kind of capture all those users appropriately.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's very thorough and very interesting. Do you have some specific examples of that you could share with us, please?
Let's see. So I'm trying to think of so a specific example in terms of like what a remarketing funnel might look like, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. So one would be, let's say you have, just for the sake of example, you have a landing page that talks about, so not, when I say landing page, it's not just your main website. It's a page dedicated to, let's say whether you have, let's say you have, your game is going to release on, Switch and PlayStation or Steam, right? And specifically where I'm talking about like multiple consoles. So you have a landing page dedicated to those consoles that your game is going to be offered on. So what you can do, especially if you have the volume to back it, because if you don't have a lot of volume, it makes a strategy a little bit more difficult. But if you have a good enough volume where people are going to your site and clicking on a link to either of those destinations, whether it's like Switch or Steam, you can actually track the people that are clicking on those outbound links and set them up as an audience. So what that does for the funnel, and this is probably about maybe I would say mid to lower range, if they're clicking on that, what I would do is essentially take those audiences from where they're going, and then you can use a remarketing ad to say, hey, look, and tailor the copies specifically to the people who are clicking on the Switch link. Or you could do the same thing, but to Steam. So that way it makes your ad resonate with them a lot better. It's not just a generic ad, but you can really hone in and focus on that particular user, reminding them. So that would be like one specific example.
Thank you. And is that the same, like, what about on Facebook? Would you see that an ad there, and then that would go to the landing page as well?
Yeah, with and like I mentioned earlier, like this strategy can work with other channels, and Facebook would be another one too, that you can totally do. And then, and the tricky part though that some people might question or ask about too is, proper attribution. And attribution is a key thing to be mindful of, and it can be difficult because with, let's say, for example, Nintendo, a lot of the ways that attribution works is providing, either tags or tracking tags or just a piece of code on a site so that able can follow that user around. So, hey, if they converted or not, or took that appropriate action. So the only tricky thing is when you get to like something like Nintendo, you may not necessarily know if that individual already converted or already bought that game yet. So that's just something to be mindful. So your strategy may reflect that a little bit in terms of how your messaging looks. And also maybe those individuals clicking on that link to Nintendo, you might not necessarily want to engage with them too much or too frequently, because they're already showing signs that they're showing interest in potentially purchasing that game. You don't want to push them too far. But to answer your question directly, as far as like other channels, or can you use that strategy for other platforms like Facebook? Yes, you can definitely do that. It's very similar to how something like Google, for example, is set up.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And I mean, they've got Google and Facebook have got a lot of different options for different scenarios and budgets.
Yes.
What do you think works best for indie developers just starting out?
So what I would say is that the main thing is get a rough idea of your audience. Know who your audience is if you haven't already. That's the first and foremost thing that you need to do. But from there, you also want to be mindful of, where, and this goes into understanding your audience some more, but where do they hang out? If you're just starting out, and let's say you don't necessarily have a large budget, then you want to make your best decision possible in terms of advertising on where your audience is. Now, with that said, I would say you really want to focus on data collection, because data collection is very, very helpful in terms of knowing more about, you know, your audience demographics, their interests, their behaviors. There's so much information that you can collect from these advertising platforms that not only will help your efforts in optimizing your paid advertising strategy and campaign, but it can also give you information that can help you on organic levels too. And what I mean by that specifically is your messaging. The audience information in these platforms is very detailed and can get very granular, especially in Facebook, down to a degree of, like, specifically what council people are interested or fans of, or whatever. So having that information is really helpful, because if you get that detailed information, your messaging might actually change a little bit and be more tailored to one audience type than the other. And then you can see those similarities and then really effectively get your core audience and what they are. But to take it even a little bit further and starting out, what things to consider, I think the main thing is, like I said, collecting that data, but also being mindful of what ad types to use. So one way you can collect some decent data still, and it wouldn't really cost that much, is YouTube. YouTube video ads, and like types are like YouTube True View ads. And also using their discovery ad feature, because what that allows you to do is you're focusing on views. So you're just, like I said, awareness in this perspective, and you can do so for very little amounts of money, as much as like 1 to 2 cents a view. And that can have a huge impact to really create that awareness about your game. Another thing to consider is also for Facebook, I would say, would be ads that really tailor to your audience. So if you know your audience is primarily on mobile devices, then using something like instant experience ads, they're also I'm trying to think, they keep changing the names, but that's the most current one as far as the ad name types. Instant experience is strictly tailored to mobile users. These ads are. So really tailoring to an audience that's on their mobile devices, and most people on Facebook are on uh, mobile devices visiting Facebook. So that's going to help benefit you as well. And also being mindful of ad types that really cater to the interests of Facebook, or for example, or that platform. And so there's ad types called lead ads, in which keep users on Facebook, but they can still follow through a call to action you have in the ad. You can still collect information like an email list, and then you can be able to, get that information, keep them on the site, and in doing so, Facebook can potentially reward you by having a lower like cost per click, or just cost associated with serving those ads. So being mindful of those things are really good ways to start out, make the most out of it. But if I was to pick one thing out of those options that can be applied to, on the Google front and Facebook front, I would say video ads, because and I think you even get it at a lower cost for showing your video on YouTube than you would on Facebook. But focusing on those videos because the costs are very low and you can really create a great impression. But most importantly of all, and from all the ad types I mentioned, you can collect a lot of very helpful user data, user information, so you can hone in on your audience further and also apply your learnings to your other campaigns, other organic efforts that you're doing.
I mean, I've got to say, this is so fascinating, and you really know your stuff. It's really helpful.
Oh, thank you.
It's really great. I mean, our audience is going to love this. Thank you. What kind of data are you able to start building when you're working on a brand new game and you have no specific customer profile initially?
Yeah, so like,
Sorry, I suppose you'd have an idea, wouldn't you, about, let's say, like I'm making a Second World War game at the moment. So
okay.
my sort of initial thoughts would be, okay, let's go for people that are fans of Call of Duty or fans of Commandos, and then secondary people who are fans of and people that actually play games and like Second World War, and then I could also go for a secondary market of people that are interested in Second World War, and then I could also go for a secondary market that would be interested in, say, tactical stealth or top down tactical stealth and or arcade shooter, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the best way to kind of go about it. But there's some things to be mindful of, because I think at face value, a lot of people, they just think, hey, what are the similarities to my game, whether they're targeting other games that that relates to the genre of game, or as you mentioned, very specifics. So one would be sometimes what is very ideal in terms of, because everybody at first is pretty much going to want to get down to close as the core audience as possible. But you might not necessarily be able to do that because some of the audiences available aren't that specific. Well, usually it just comes down to is simply a matter of not enough volume. So like Google or Facebook might not create a segment that you can target to that level. So how do you get there is then the question. So it's about being kind of creative with who you're targeting, because sometimes some of those specific audience don't necessarily reveal everything. So the approach I like to take to really understand building up that user base in terms of more of an audience and what that core really is starting off a little broad but not too broad. And also when you can start in let's say your game is going to release on a particular console. You can start targeting one console. Okay, we're only going to target PlayStation, but then layering another audience with that. And what's really good about that is you can start big and then really hone down and chop away at your audience, but you might not want to get too far with some of the examples that you provided, because it could be limiting where you find out that, okay, of everything I'm targeting that's very specific to my core, this only makes up for a very small population. And now I can't effectively, yes, I have a core audience, but I might not necessarily be able to get in front of, the amount of people I need to kind of hit other objectives and other, goals that I have in mind. So, like I said, I would start off maybe a little bit broad and find some other ones to kind of hone in and go from there and kind of layer those audiences. And by doing that, it gives you a better idea of what exactly like what to target. So there's going to be some guessing involved, clearly, because like I said, these platforms don't necessarily provide very specific segments. So and sometimes what you can do too, and this is one tool you can use on Facebook that can be really helpful, is you can plug in some of these already determined audiences that they have, these segments that you can target. And I believe it's called Audience Insights. You can go into that, and this is all within like Facebook Ads Manager tool, or the whole platform essentially. And you can plug that audience in and then see the affinity or other types of audiences that relate to that from a page perspective, demographic data, and all those other things. And if you start evaluating all these different audiences and kind of connecting the dots, you then are able to determine well, or originally you thought your age demographic was like, let's say 25 to 35. For a war game, it probably maybe pushed out a little bit later, right? But then as you review all those audiences and drill it down, you're able to then determine, okay, I know my age bracket is exactly between like, um, like within 5 years, right? You'd be able to do that based off of that information. And last but not least, the other reason why I say to go a little bit broader, which a lot of people don't necessarily understand this concept and how, like, for example, Facebook works. And Google's getting to this point, but not to the degree I feel that Facebook's at now, is you could, Facebook is really, really good at figuring out who you're trying to target. So you get that audience the best way that you can cater, the best way you can drill it down to based off of what they offer available, and make sure. And the reason why I keep mentioning about being a little bit broad, even though it might be counterintuitive, is because if you're too specific with an audience, especially if you're limited on funds and what you can, allow to, or what you're able to pay for a campaign, Facebook's system is going to be very limited to who they can reach out to and determine who's going to be the best fit for the action you want them to take. The more information Facebook has, then the better they'll be able to serve your ad to an individual that is likely to take an action. So that's why, more than anything, I talk about being a little bit broader, but still layering and trying to hone in as much as you can, as you provided with your example, because it's going to give the system a lot more to work with and to make that determination. And there's so many signals and that they can pick up from their algorithm. It's almost kind of ridiculous what they're able to do, and they keep updating it and perfecting it as moving forward. So that's the main ways I would go.
Can you give us some examples of that?
Oh, in terms of
the clever things that they can do?
Oh, clever things. Like, for example, another one that's really great. So we just kind of talked about how clever Facebook is essentially on honing in all these things. And we were just mentioning about how it's for specific data sets that they have. Well, what we can do, or you can do, is, let's say you take that to a new level where you have users, that are focused on or committing an action, let's say signing up for your email list or whatever. Well, you can take that information, all these emails that you're collecting, and then create a custom audience. If you have a large enough audience, you can also do this in Google too. But you create this custom audience, and then within Facebook, you can take that and make a lookalike audience. And basically what you're doing is you're uploading that information. You're not reaching out directly to these users, but you create this lookalike audience, which is telling Facebook, hey, I have all these people. They committed and made it, they committed and filled out my form, but I now want to serve ads to people just like these people. And what they'll do is you upload it into their system, and they look at all their, it's kind of scary in some ways, but they look at all their profile information, all their behaviors, and then they say, okay, we have our set of data, and now we're going to go ahead and market directly to individuals that are just like these people. And that's like some of the crazy stuff that you can do.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
So let's start a little bit of a tangent to that.
Okay.
What would you recommend starting doing when developers have not yet published but want to build awareness?
Okay. So yeah, so you're saying that they haven't published, but they still want to build awareness. So I'll go on a little tangent here. One thing I think is good, I mean, just in terms of like outside of paid, just doing whatever you can to promote your game and getting it out there. A good way for this is like Reddit. I wouldn't recommend Facebook on that sense, because there's literally like no organic value in Facebook anymore, very limited. If you have a really big audience, then I would say probably post there, but otherwise.
What about like joining relevant groups, like if
and
genre
exactly.
specific stuff,
Yeah, groups are great. I would just be mindful of, what people are posting, and also, look at, and what I mean by being mindful of that, some groups aren't really what they seem to be, or it's just not really relevant. And you want to make sure it's relevant to not just your game or this, or the genre of your game, but also like, are people just like commenting for the sake of commenting? Is it basically comes down to, is it providing value? The other one is obviously Twitter. A lot of people are there, whether it's from players, and there's a lot of things that you can get from by promoting your games to other devs too. A lot of people think, oh, I just want to focus on players, and yes, of course you do, but tapping into other devs, providing value to them, and they get excited about games too. I know a lot of devs that are very interested in other games that other indie devs, and while it might be a small portion, they're also interested there too in terms of purchasing other games and stuff, because they're always trying to learn, and one way to learn is obviously to play other games. But Twitter's another good one. But in terms of going back to paid, and I apologize with that tangent, I somewhat distracted myself of the question you were asking in terms of like just I guess other ways to start out.
It's all good, Andrew. You're doing great. Thank you.
Oh, right. But I'm sorry, just to repeat the question again. I apologize.
Yeah, sure. It was, I've got it here. Oh, I've lost my place now. We'll edit this bit out, okay?
Yep.
Yeah. What would you recommend starting doing when developers have not yet published, but
Right. Sorry.
build awareness? Yeah.
So and the reason why I was saying about the organic efforts first is because by doing those things, even though you'd probably have a small data set, it gives you some insight in terms of, okay, where do I start? How do I start doing this from a paid perspective? Because if you go in without knowing anything, that's okay too. But if you can go in with as much information as you can possibly get, that's going to be a little bit more helpful. So, you know, writing a Twitter post that all of a sudden, for whatever reason, got a lot of like, replies or retweets and stuff. There could be some information there that helps you make a decision in terms of, oh, what my ad copy is going to look at. So for anybody just like starting out and not having, too much that they can go from with their game, like it's not available, they don't have a demo yet, I would say the best thing are going to be assets, or more specifically creative. And what I mean by that is, have a video at least available of some gameplay footage, have screenshots available that you can share. And because, well, the main thing with a lot of the advertising that we talked about before, the paid advertising, I mean, if you just have concept art, well, that could work, I'm sure. It's not going to be the same as really showing people what the gameplay is like. In screenshots in your ads and videos like trailers or even gameplay videos are going to be the best ways to do that. So making sure that you have those creative assets available so you can use that in your ad copy is going to be very helpful. And more specifically, especially at a high level, I would say probably go with video, because if you're just starting out, you might not necessarily have acquired all the funds yet to move forward at a level that you'd want to. Not only that, you'd probably want to maximize your spend further out closer to launch. So then I would, from just an awareness, high funnel type stuff, focus more on videos. Or you could also focus a little bit more on, generating an email list and building that up. And again, that's why assets are very important, creative, because you could take some of those assets. Let's say you already have some music generated. You could use sound, some audio clips or specifically tracks from levels, and use that as an incentive to get people to sign up for your email. So that's what I would do starting out, is probably focus on an awareness perspective, and if from a high funnel, and from a like more mid funnel, get people and feed them into your email list, because that's going to give you more people on board that want to learn more about your game, and it allows you a lot more control to interact with those people.
So, yeah, thank you. That's great. So it begs a question from me then. If you've let's say you've got a couple of those videos up on YouTube. You've got your own website, and you've built, you've got some people have signed up to your Discord or signed up to your Facebook page, and you're doing this organically. How do you then ask them for their email? What's the best way to collect the emails from potential customers?
Yeah, no, great question. There's a few ways you can do this. One is one is making sure that you have a landing page designed to convert. Okay, so what does that mean? That means, well, one, let's say you're driving traffic to this landing page, and in doing so, you want to make sure that your messaging also relates to the messaging or delivers what the messaging is saying in your ad on that landing page. Because if the messaging in your ad doesn't relate with the landing page, then it's not it basically it will throw users off, and it's really just not coming down to the best user experience. So that's the main thing. When people get to your landing page, if that's one of your main ways of converting users, you want to make sure that there's great content there. It doesn't have to be too in depth or anything like that, but maybe have a footage or a gameplay video showing people what the game is actually like, having a strong call to action, and also, as I mentioned before, having like a incentive or lead magnet, as they can call it sometimes in terms of marketing. And what that does is it incentivizes users so they get excited about the gameplay, make sure it's like really good gameplay footage, have screenshots available too. Basically anything that you would do, like for anybody releasing on Steam, you want your best foot forward in terms of the images, the type of banner ad that you're using, things like that, that really do a good job of capturing people who are going there. And then with the incentive, we mentioned you could do a like an audio track from one of your levels or something. It could be something like some type of other download, such as you do have a demo of the game, you can go ahead and release that. Or what else? I mean, there's a number of different things you can do. Um, you can even potentially do a quiz, as crazy as that sounds, especially if the quiz is relating to topics about your game. Like you were talking about, a war game. And if it's from a particular era, you can have a quiz of ask, like, let's say, hey, take our quiz. And then from that, in order to get the results or something like that, it's gated. And then they can enter their email address there. So there's a lot of different things that you can do on your own landing page. But the most that you want to do is have that call to action, have some type of incentive. It's not necessary, but it helps. And
So
also
you could, like, for example, you could do a poll that says, like,
yes.
what's your favorite Second World War video game? Is it Call of Duty? Is it Commandos, etc.?
Yeah, you have to do
And then
that.
collect the email.
Yeah, you can definitely do that, but you also want to be mindful, and this is again why it's so important to get in the head of your audience, because you don't want to just provide something for the sake of providing it. You want to make sure that to your audience, to your core audience, or the people that are most interested in your game, that it's going to provide them value. And if you can provide them value, but also get them excited about the game, that's even better. And a lot of times people are like, well, I don't have the time to create some of these things. Well, what I tell a lot of devs in particular is like, you already have a lot of assets available, generally do. And if you're like just starting out, give yourself some time to get some of these assets available. But you already have a lot of these things. Another idea is like an art book. If you have concept art or other art, you could put together just a PDF file of an art book. But the important thing is it's definitely it's going to help in conversion rate if you have some type of incentive to get people there. Taking this one step further, outside of, let's say, directing people to a landing page that's designed to convert well, we mentioned earlier lead ads. At least with Facebook, you have these. And what they can do is you can provide basically all like kind of a similar structure, but it's all delivered in the messaging. And what this does is people get interested, and then you say, hey, if you want this, music track, then just provide your information. And what's really nice about lead ads is simply the user, because all their information is already in Facebook, they just click one button. It auto populates that information, like with their email address. And then afterwards, it just says a thank you prompt, and then it can direct them to a page where that asset is available. Or you can then take that user email information, put it into whatever you're using, like something like MailChimp or whatever. And when they get a welcome email, that asset could be available for them to download.
Oh yeah, thank you. That's really clear. So you also mentioned, I think to Nicola actually, ways earlier ways to start for as little as $5 a day to get data. Can you share a bit about that?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, like you can, when collecting data and stuff, you can do so with very little money, and specifically as low as like $5 a day. Now, and what that means is, and what that allows you to do is, I would only go in though, if you're doing that, I would only go in from a data collection standpoint. If you're looking to say, oh, for $5 a day, I'm gonna hopefully get all these leads and everything, well, that most likely may not happen. It can, but you want to go in with the right mindset, with the right expectations. But for as little as $5 a day, you can run an ad. Again, Facebook is going to use their best judgment possible to serve that ad to the people they think is the best person to view that ad and is more likely to take an action, whether it's a click or whatever your objectives are for that campaign. So, and what that will do is, even though it's still going to be a small data set, it's going to be a lot more information that you can get, like I mentioned before, from demographic information, interest information, behavioral information, like all that data you can collect from these. Yes, it's not going to be as much information as you would probably like with only $5 a day, but it's going to be a lot more than simply you guessing or assuming by, oh, I know people in my audience visit this type of like forum or website or whatever. You're going to get a lot granular information that will help you with developing your audiences and tailoring your messaging and all other, and helping with all other efforts with your marketing efforts.
Thank you. Now, email signups you can get for $1 each. Is that right?
Well, so I remember us talking before, and that was a figure I mentioned. But I would say you can go as low as $1 each. In some cases, you can even go lower, and in some you can go higher. It's really a case-by-case basis. There's a lot of factors at play. But one way to do this, and kind of what we already talked about before, is really providing value in that user experience and that journey from, and making sure your copy aligns with your landing page, for example. There's one individual that I worked with before, and he had a great incentive. It was an art book. He actually did a lot of his own art too, and it was very unique. And he had a good landing page developed, and just between that experience, the artwork that he had, because it was unique and very different, we were seeing results on average about $1 for an email sign up. And I believe the ads that we were using were specifically either the instant experience I mentioned earlier, or they were actually carousel ads too. I think they were both on average getting about that $1 sign up. So
were these ads on Facebook or Google or both?
These in particular were on Facebook, and another strategy too that can be more likely to hit that mark would also be using those lead ads I mentioned. And one of the main reasons behind that is because the lead ads, as I mentioned before, keep people on Facebook. So Facebook tends to kind of reward you, because it's like, hey, look, you're serving an ad. We're giving you this incentive of it's more likely to convert, but you're also keeping our users on Facebook platform. The reason why that's important is because the longer people are on Facebook, it means that Facebook has the ability for all other advertisers to serve these users. The more the users are on there, the more happy Facebook's advertisers are going to be. And that's why using things that cater to the platform a little bit more are going to be helpful. But lead ads are another way to do that too, to get that mark. But like I said too, it is a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. I mean, on a case-by-case basis, can you tell us a little bit more about that particular case? So the guy had the art book, and the art book was in relation to his game, I assume.
Yes.
So what did the ad say? Did it say, sign up to my game and get a free art book? Or did it say, do you like this kind of genre of game? Here's an art book. How was it? What was the step-by-step kind of process?
I'm trying to remember. I wish I knew what the exact ad copy was, but basically it was just a message about the game. Um, and yeah, it was just a message about the game. With that message, he had appropriate, I think it was mostly videos actually. And you could still not just focusing on a video ad, but like I said, with the instant experience that's mobile focused and carousel, you can still put a video inside of those ads too, followed by screenshots. So I think it was a combination of having that message about the game relate to the imagery that you saw, having a video and having a few other images there so people can engage with the ad further. And then you can have a headline, which does have like a click call to action button, like learn more or whatever, or download now, or there's a lot of predetermined call to actions on those. So it really came down to having the messaging about the game, and then having that headline, which is like a longer call to action, like get the free book, art book now, and then having that button that you can select, which is learn more. And that's primarily what it was. And then everything else we outlined, which is, having that landing page that would convert. So it's nothing like absolutely crazy or requires a lot of skill. You just got to be mindful of, is what you're saying providing the user with that whole, is what you're saying true essentially, or and not misleading.
Thank you. That's really clear. Can you, for indies with a bigger budget, what would you recommend there?
I would say with a bigger budget, just taking a holistic approach. And what I mean by that is, to kind of paraphrase it, earlier we talked about, kind of using these things, collecting data and like testing things out. Test out different channels. You can always get a clear sense of, or a pretty good idea of, where your audience hangs out and everything, but it's always good to test things out further. And what I mean by that is test out multiple channels. You could, if you have a bigger budget, it also means you could probably initiate a larger remarketing campaign strategy. So for example, if you have people clicking on a link that you posted, whether it's organically or not in Twitter, and going to a specific landing page, you could set up, let's say, multiple landing pages that are copy of each other, right? So, and what I mean by this is, let's say you have you make a Twitter post, it's going to a very specific landing page that only people from Twitter are going to. And do that same thing with like, you make a post or you have an ad, and that landing page, only people from Facebook are going to that landing page. And then what you could do is, so obviously making duplicates, even though it can be fairly easy, still takes time and resources. So if you have the budget, you have those time and resources, or potentially resources, to do that. But then you set up, like we mentioned before, you set up audiences for each of those specific landing pages. So then what you can do is you take that remarketing audience, or you set up a remarketing audience from your Facebook ad, but now you're going to remarket everybody on YouTube, or you're going to remarket everybody that's on like going to websites with Google Display. So, and now because you know exactly that individual or those group of people came from Facebook, if your ad, and depending on proper attribution or tracking with, not to get too detailed here, but with tracking with proper custom parameters on your ads that can give you very specific information as to like what that ad copy was about, Now you can re-engage those users that came from Facebook on that landing page through either like Twitter or Google, and have messaging that was similar to the messaging on your Facebook post. And now you can really hone in and do some crazy stuff in terms of really targeting those individuals. And what that allows you to do too is help you drive those users further down your funnel, whatever your final action is. So that's one way. That's like just one of probably a lot of different strategies you can do. Another one at a higher level is basically you could just target different segments. You have an idea of, you know, if you've already collected some data, got some insight, you can maybe say, all right, instead of doing all these in just one campaign, I want to have this main target audience, let's say, just for example, PlayStation, people interested in PlayStation, and then I'm going to layer it with this war game information. And that's one campaign. And then you could do another one where PlayStation, but then you layer it with something different. And then you do that. So that way you're still targeting a main broad audience, but then you're layering it something different. And then also making sure that you're excluding the differences with those other campaigns, because you don't want overlap to occur. And what that does is it allows you to hone in even in a greater detail as far as which audiences are the best ones that you need to cater to. Because once you test out, once you have this more holistic approach, what you'll start finding is, one, maybe the whole approach and strategy is going to be very effective if you have that budget. Or two, you might find out that, hey, we tried out a bunch of things and we had this really good strategy in place that revealed a lot of information, but we ultimately learned that Facebook's the way to go. We're going to put all our money there because the cost per lead that we're getting, the return on our investment, is much greater through these channels than it is with anything else. So if you have the budget, I would say be holistic, try different things, have a good strategy in place so you can really hone in and nail down what is going to get you the best return on investment, what is going to get you the best cost per lead. Because if you only have one channel, that if you have the budget and you're only trying one channel and say, oh, $5 is good enough for me for a cost per lead, you might be, losing money if you don't know that somewhere else can get you half of that. And that makes a big difference.
Great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so the retargeting is very important then, because you might you might do something on Facebook and then retarget people on YouTube, and you might get it for half the price that you did on Facebook.
Right, exactly. So there's a lot of different ways and things to go about it, but essentially that's it too. And one more thing to throw out there too in terms of remarketing, you don't need any money to set up a remarketing audience. So what I mean by that is, yes, you can go ahead, still set up an account, like a paid account, whether it's Google or Facebook. I think to some extent, I can't remember right off the top of my head, but you still might need to put in, some credit card information, but it doesn't mean that you're going to have to pay for ads or anything like that. But once you have those accounts set up and through some linking through, and you need to make sure that you have the ability to obviously put code on your site with Google. There's an easy way of doing it through analytics and having that. And you can set up audiences within there or Facebook, and you can basically set this up a tag so it's collecting that information. And you could set it, I think for Facebook, it's only up to 180 days. With Google, it's up to 540 days. But you can collect that information. And even if you're not ready to pay yet, you could, like, if later you're like, okay, I want to go ahead and use this remarketing campaign, you already have that audience generated. So you could tap into that audience that has already engaged with you right away. Because if you don't do that, in some cases, especially if your site takes a while to collect, visits, then you could be waiting months before you could tap into that resource. So you could do everything I just mentioned, set up a remarketing pool, a remarketing audience without even having to pay anything.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you. That's really so useful. Some people are hesitant about retargeting. They get creeped out by the advert kind of following them around, wherever they go on the web, for example. What do you say to, how do we get around that?
I would say the best way to approach it is simply you're providing value and a service to people by re-engaging with them. And that's why, as if you haven't noticed already, I use that term a lot, re-engaging, opposed to following them around. And yeah, there's going to be elements.
Yeah, brilliant.
But there's going to be elements where some people feel like, oh, that is kind of creepy. It's like, well, you know what? It's happening to you whether you like it or not. And what's really cool about it too is simply the fact that because of this and because of some of the strategies we talked about, you're actually providing a better value and service to people because you're catering and tailoring messaging to something that they have already shown interest in. So if they already showed interested in your game to some extent, then you shouldn't feel bad about letting them know about the game again. Because, and as I mentioned before, people forget. They're not going to remember everything. So, especially maybe a game, because let's face it, we all have lives, and games are at the forefront of those of the lives, no matter like how excited we might be about them. So that's how I boil it down, and that's why I think people who are either not necessarily fearful but concerned about that creepy aspect, you're not being creepy about it. Now, if you're blatantly throwing tons of money at just that and you have a small audience and they're seeing it all the time, well, that's just not being smart. It's not being, in some ways, some people might view it as not even being ethical.
Well, that's inappropriate then, isn't it?
Right, exactly. But that's what it comes
I get what you're saying. You're basically, you're doing people a service by reminding them that it is something that they really want. And in amongst the sort of information overload, you're getting them something that they're really looking forward to playing.
Right. And advertising platforms have recognized this too, and that's why they've always made sure to get better, because they don't want people receiving these ads to be bugged out either. So they've kind of helped and done things to help with that. But basically, that's the way to look at it: is you're providing that service, your value, and you're just reminding people about your game, because they are going to forget.
Yeah, thank you. So we're running out of time, but I've still got a couple of questions to ask. Are you okay to carry on for a bit?
Sure.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. Can you give us some advice, to indies, to us all, specifically for Twitter, YouTube, Gmail ads, Google ads? Like, is it worth bothering with Google ads, for example?
Yeah. So Google ads, and I know this can get a term thrown around, and as I said, Google is actually really encompassing of a lot of different things, which is specifically, display, search, YouTube. That's kind of all under Google, and Gmail being one of them. To be quite honest, I haven't really leveraged Gmail ads before, so I really can't speak to that. But for search, I honestly wouldn't bother. And search specifically is when you set up campaigns, you target keywords, and when people type in the keywords in Google search, then your ad will be triggered and show. The reason why is because a lot of times, basically, or pretty much most of the time, you can't align the intent that a user has with the keyword. Let's say if you're saying like, oh, World War II game, that we really don't know what the intent of if that game is. They could be, or if you say Call of Duty as a keyword, they're probably looking for something relating to Call of Duty, whether it's a guide or any number of things. And guess what? Your game isn't Call of Duty, so that's not going to work. And a lot of times it just doesn't align with the user intent, and you're just throwing your money away. So that's why I never say to do search. But for display, YouTube, all the things we mentioned about, those are the areas I would focus on there. Now for Twitter, I always say like lead with the organic efforts first, because you can get a lot out of organic methods, whether they're manually done or even if you have some form of automation in place. And if you do decide to use automation, just be careful, because that can get out of hand if you're not careful. But even for advertising for Twitter, I don't leverage that too much. And the only reason being is because, yes, they have gotten a lot better. I think several months ago, they have actually revamped a lot of the targeting, everything. So it's a lot more honed in, which is kind of cool. Um, but I just don't see the same type of results that I get with like Facebook or like YouTube, for example. But it is a great way to, from an awareness perspective, I would focus on that. But they do have lots of options available there too, in terms of like a lot of similar offerings that we've talked about with Facebook or Google. So it's definitely something worth to consider. But I would at least start out with organic methods on Twitter. And for Facebook, again, what I mentioned before is instant experience, carousel ads, and lead ads are probably the best ones to go with. You can incorporate video in a lot of those. You can do video specific, and make sure to check what the objectives are in Facebook. And what I mean by objective is it could be a campaign could be focused for clicks, could be focused for video views, it could be focused for conversions. There's a lot of different things. Make sure that whatever you're setting up aligns with your objectives of and your goals. Because if, let's say, you want people to, um, you know, convert and sign up for your email list, then you don't want to set up a click campaign objective, because what Facebook's going to do in that case is really focus on, oh, I'm just going to get the best amount of clicks on people who I think will click on this ad. Whereas if you do conversion objective, they're going to be like, oh, I'm going to serve this ad to people who I think will convert based off of the settings. So make sure you have those in place. But those three ad types, instant experience, carousel, and lead ads, are kind of the way I'd go with Facebook. But there are a lot of other options too. And depending on your strategy or your game, it might warrant to explore some of those too. So if there's one though I'd call out as far as just don't use it, it'd definitely be Google search. Because like I said, it's just really difficult to align that intent. Unless, of course, you're a big entity and people recognize your name. But then again, especially if it's like branded terms of whatever your studio name is or your game is, then you might be getting that organically anyways. And unless people are bidding on it, then maybe you would want to do that for like more safety purposes or protection, as I like to call it. But otherwise, don't bother with Google search.
Thank you. This is absolutely fabulous. I mean, I'd like to just ask you one sort of final question about Reddit, but before I do, you picked up, you used the word strategy, and you reminded me, that every game, every indie should have a marketing strategy, even if they're new, even if they're just starting out. Otherwise, the game's just not going to get seen. Is that something that you offer? Can you help as part of your consultancy service to develop a strategy with indies?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's one of whether it's from a consulting perspective or even managing services, we always go into looking at, developing what's going to be an effective strategy. And it could be more holistic, it could be more specific. And it varies quite a bit depending on, the needs of the people that I work with. For example, I had one individual where we were focusing on a lot of different things. And this is just a consulting client. And then it came up that he was approached by a publisher. And then obviously his needs shifted dramatically. And we developed a strategy or what's kind of a good course to consider, because it ended up that first publisher that approached him wasn't necessarily didn't work out, or it didn't work out. So then, but it was still top of mind. It was one of his main objectives in terms of working with me was, I'm a solo dev. I want a publisher. So then we developed a strategy in terms of what are the means basically to get representation, because that's what you want. And from that strategy, he followed through with it, and he ended up finding his ideal publisher. So
yeah, no, that's great.
So that's,
I suppose that's like build a community to show the publisher that you have an audience for your game already, right?
Right. And on a different level, though, let's say more basic, strategy. I mean, yes, that's something we provide, but more, but in addition to that, I do have on our website, we do have a free marketing plan template. So basically that outlines the entire, like marketing plan down to the T as far as what channel assets and things like that. So, that,
What a fabulous thing.
yeah.
What's the URL for that, please?
The You can actually get it. It's a pop-up that comes up when you visit the site, but it's just rengenmarketing.com.
Thank you.
And there's a guide that goes with it too on the blog post. That says it's how to develop a marketing plan, and it has a link to download to sign up for the email list, and then you will get that in your inbox as far as the marketing plan.
That's absolutely fabulous. Thank you. What great value as well. So yeah, I think my final question actually is we've certainly interviewed people on this channel and spoken to people about going viral on Reddit, and that being helpful to promote the title and get people interested. What's your experience there, please?
So I would say the main thing to really focus and hone in on is it, and I might make this sound too simple, but it's really true, is, you know, go in with the intent to provide value with your post and also make something worth sharing. So yes, this can be really hard to hone in on and determine, okay, what is that? That's the magic question, right? Well, it varies on a different level, on a lot of different levels. But the last and final thing, keeping those two things in mind, is going to be look what other people are doing. Look what content is going viral, and look at it from an analytical perspective, not like compare and despair. Because if you say like, oh well, I don't have that and I don't have that, you're going in with a negative mindset, and it's not going to be helpful to trying to go viral. So whether another thing too is what I found is, and you'll see this across the board too with other posts, is go in making a statement. Don't like ask people to answer a question. I'm sure it can still work in some cases, but a lot for at least your heading of your post, but go in making a statement, and it could be a very simple one. And I generally find that
For example?
I'm trying to think, and it could be seriously like very simple, like you like let's say you're working on a new mechanic or a new attack for your game. It's just like, oh, new attack for X title, and then by you can insert like an imager GIF, and just and that's it. So you make a statement, you show what the statement is about, and then people can engage with that. Now, think of it this way too. If you use these concepts and ideas on trying to get viral, the biggest thing, like I said, is not just looking at what other people have done, but test it out. You're probably not going to go viral right away. You might be able to, but it's going to take a lot of trial and error. You're going to have to test things a lot, and that's more important. That's very important too. So if you're really trying to develop some type of strategy to go viral, I would say provide value, make something that's worth sharing, and and just kind of follow those things and test. Always be testing, because if you're not really going to have that insight. Like these people that are posting stuff, unless they're not necessarily going to be doing it right the first time. And if they do, they might have gotten lucky. They might have had a really awesome game that they took forever to make and has a lot of polish to it. There's a lot of factors, but that's what I would do if you're and and going viral is sometimes not necessarily the right mindset. That's why, again, going back to just providing value and make something worth sharing, because if you go in with those things, you're probably going to be disappointed. So don't lead with that. Just make sure, and don't be promotional too. And not only that, like a lot of Reddit posts, they have like a or channels, subreddits, they have like a 10% rule where they'll review, and if you have like, so 1 out of every 10 posts can only be promotional. So if you try, basically they look at that as like spam and not providing value to the community. Hence again, why I say value so much. So don't be promotional. You can have ways of indirectly promote through a comment. If people are asking about the game, you can mention the game in there. Don't stuff it with links to your website, because Redditors will call you out on it. So just again, provide value and focus on content that's worth sharing.
Thank you. I know I said that was the last question. I got one more. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Thank you. YouTube, anything on specific on the promo videos?
So promo videos as in like trailers, or just ads as a whole?
Yeah, trailers. But it would be good to sort of hear from you what you think about the ads as well, and about the best combination between putting up trailers and ads.
Yeah, sure. So for a trailer, what I would recommend is, because I know a lot of people can struggle with this. Well, the first and foremost, you want to provide something that has a lot of gameplay. Obviously, I mean that's going to be, but not just gameplay, but also maybe other elements of the game too. It gives people a much better sense of it than just the gameplay. But it depends on what your game is too. Sometimes that might be important, sometimes it might not. But the more important thing I would say is, and this is, I think, a very difficult concept for people to grasp sometimes, but you want your trailer to have some type of narrative. And what I mean by that is, if there's a way through the showing images of gameplay that progresses and tells a story, then that's going to be a lot more captivating than just showing a bunch of gameplay footage, because you really want your trailer to
Like
stand.
developer diaries kind of thing.
Yeah, essentially. But just on a,
Vlogs.
I'm sorry.
I mean vlogs.
Oh, vlogs. So you're talking about like.
So it's like, here are the developments of the game. This is what's going on in the studio, and then
I see what you're saying.
and then we've made the story of the game that way. Or do you mean individual trailers that?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. So not necessarily. When I say story, I'm basically saying, think of your traditional trailer that just shows featured images of the gameplay, but align that in a way where it kind of tells a story. I think I did write about this on a blog post, and I think one of the examples I used was, I forget which version of the trailer it is now, but Church in the Darkness does a great job of having a narrative in their trailer. And then also, I think the game is called 314, and that's a really good example, because what it does, it's just shapes, and it's like a platformer. But between the use of music and how the shots are cut together, if you look at when they're cut, the timing of it, the sequence of it, how the pacing, how it changes with the music. And obviously, if it's a shape going through a platformer or it's a platformer game, there's no story to tell. But so you're telling the story visually. And I think that's probably the best example a lot of people can probably understand, is because when you see those elements of pacing, how the cuts and the edits are aligned with each other and everything, you see how visually that is actually telling a story, especially when it aligns with the music. And that's what I mean from a trailer perspective and like a promo video. You want to cut something like that opposed to just showing gameplay, because it's going to be more engaging. It's going to get people more excited about the game, and it draws in like basic story structure. You have a quick hook. It shows a little bit of progression. You have the climax. Climax could be like a boss fight, and then you end with like a lower point, and then obviously your slug for the the title card for what the game is and stuff.
Great. So you're talking more like the trailers, yeah?
Yeah, specifically. I mean, other content and putting it on your channel is good too, because as you start developing an audience, like you mentioned briefly before, like devlogs and things like that, that's going to be helpful on a going to a different end, Twitch streams, that stuff's helpful too. But it's really, I think, comes down to more than anything that some people might have a difficult time grasping for. They hear all the success with Twitch streams and everything, and that's definitely a good thing to consider. But sometimes starting out, you might not necessarily get that attention. But with whatever your content that you're producing, whether it's regardless of where it is and what it is, starting out, it's going to take time to get there, but you'll get there eventually. It's just, it's going to take time. So regardless of what you're doing, regardless of what minimal results you might get starting out, it will add up in time. Just sometimes it will take longer for some than others, and don't let that bother you. That's just how it goes sometimes.
Thank you. And in terms of the paid advertising in YouTube and adverts, anything you can say about that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, in a lot of cases, I wouldn't focus so much. Like, let's say if you have a lot of devlogs, I wouldn't necessarily promote those unless there's, let's say, maybe something of comedic value behind it, or something. I would just be careful with that, because I think some devlogs can, depending on who you're targeting, like, just again, be mindful of your audience, because who you're targeting, devlogs might not be that interesting, especially if you're like, showcasing on like Markiplier site, channel. They might not really care, but they could. You don't know. You'd have to be mindful of that. But I would say something that's just like really eye catching. It could just be quick. Gameplay footage. If you have a trailer, obviously you can promote that. But I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can go about it. But I like to think of efforts that are also scalable, because we know that time and resources are limited. So what you're producing for some of your content, if you can find ways to repurpose that and use it as an ad, it could be another good way to test things out too. So maybe if you're testing some of that stuff out, you could see like, oh wow, a lot of people watched this all the way through, opposed to this video, so maybe I'll use that for my next Twitter post, for example, or Facebook post, or whatever. So a lot of different ways you could do that. But for ads, I would say just make it pacing. Honestly, it just comes down to what I was saying about the trailer. It doesn't have to be another trailer, but make sure there's some type of narrative, or the pacing is in a manner that is not like really slow, or just somehow it's captivating. So whether that could be a slow introduction of something that's creating mystery, or people not knowing what's going on, and then you finally slowly reveal it. That's one way of doing it. Or another is just having a lot of quick cuts with fast-paced music. That could be another effective way. But it really depends on your game, the style of your game, and what your main objective is too.
Thank you so much. This has been absolutely fabulous. It's fascinating, Andrew, really. How can people reach you if they want to get in touch?
So I would say the best way is to, you can reach me out directly on email, which is andrew@rengenmarketing.com. I am on Twitter and Facebook occasionally. The handle is at Rengen Marketing. Our Facebook page is just Rengen Marketing. But really the best way to, get in touch with me, I would say would be by email, which is andrew@rengenmarketing.com.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, no problem. And thank you so much.
For half an hour, so that's how much fun. Thank you.
And I really appreciate you guys having me, because like I said, it's just awesome to be here, and I'm glad I could be a part of this great community to help out others. So thank you.